So in this new chapter, we are going to learn about the legislation. So the important work of the parliament is of making laws, that is to legislate. So a key function of the parliament is to make laws. Obviously, we understood, and it's on many subjects on the union and the current concurrent list of the seven schedule to the constitution. The laws made by parliament on the union list subjects apply to the whole of the India. In case of a concurrent list item, state legislatures can also make law, but a law passed by the parliament will override the state law if there is any contradiction. The process of enacting law is as follows. Bills may be introduced on behalf of the government by the relevant minister. These bills are called government bills. Any other MP may also introduce a bill. These are called a private member's bill. If a private member bill is passed in one house, another MP who is a member of the other house will have to pilot it in that house. The introduction of a bill in the house is called the first reading. At this stage, so this is the first reading. So what happens at this stage? There are only two permitted grounds for objection: that the bill violates some provision of the constitution, or the item is in the state list and therefore parliament does not have jurisdiction to make law on the issue, which is in sense is a constitutional violation. After introduction, the speaker may refer the bill to the relevant departmentally related standing committee. This step is discretionary, so the speaker can do that or not do that. It's to its own discretion. And honestly saying, in the last few years, this particular thing has been lessened. Like, bills are not sent to standing committees, and the opposition party is always creating a ruckus about that, like this is not happening. So, and the government is saying just to save the time we are doing this thing. After the committee's report is tabled, the bill may be taken up for consideration. At this stage, the provisions of the bill are discussed in detail. A clause by clause discussion takes place and amendments may be moved. Each clause is voted upon. This compromises the second reading. Then the bill is taken up for a final vote, that is the third reading. There is no discussion at this stage, only an up or a down vote. Following passage, the bill is transmitted to the other house for the first reading, and the other two stages are also followed. After the bill is passed by the second house, it is sent to the president for his assent. At this point, the bill becomes an act. So for money bill, you have to understand, for money bill, president's president's assent, his will, is really very important before sending the money bill, before discussing the money bill or introducing the money bill in the parliament. The standing committee system for considering bill was created in 1993, sorry. However, referral to the committee is not mandatory. There are several important bills that bypass this step. For example, the Criminal Laws Amendment Bill 2013, which made several significant changes to the Indian Penal Code, Indian Evidence Act, and the Code of Criminal Procedure in relation to violence against women, was not referred to the relevant committee. Similarly, the National Investigation Agency Act, which was passed soon after the November 2008 terrorist strike in Mumbai, was passed without scrutiny by the committee. This process differs from the British system. In the British Parliament, the committee examines all bills after the second reading in each house, and the next step can take place only after the committee's report is presented. One way to measure how well Parliament is performing its legislative role is to look at the number of bills passed. However, this number does not give any indication of the quality of the bill passed. There could be ways to judge whether an act is a robust one, whether it clearly um, enunciates the objective, makes the relevant provisions in a coherent manner, in written in unambiguous and simple language, and so on. We do not go into these details in these chapters, so not those much of details. First, does the parliament devote sufficient time to debate the bills? During the 14th and the 15th Lok Sabha, however, as we saw, like 28% of the bills were not discussed in any detail. A second measure is to account the number of acts that were amended within 3 or 5 years of enactment. With any legislation with any legislation may need to be amended to cater to changing circumstances. An amendment shortly after passage indicates that some key factor was missed or an imminent change in circumstances was not foreseen. In this period since 1993, about 1% of all laws enacted have been amended within 3 years of their passage, and a further 2% in 3 to 5 years since they are being passed. There can be several improvements in the process. First, the pre-legislative process of drafting bills can be strengthened. Second, the standing committee process can be made mandatory with a provision for fast-tracking urgent bills. Third, the support system for MPs and committees to better examine bills could be enhanced. That is, okay. So fourth, the anti-defection law could be amended to enable a free discussion on the various issues of a bill and to find a reasonable balance across conflicting objectives. Fifth, greater interest and accountabilities of MPs could be encouraged by requiring division on every bill and major clauses and amendments. So what is this anti-defection law? I will come to it in a separate chapter. Now what is a private member bill? So any legislation that is initiated by a private member is called a private member's bill. Historically, such bills have not been given much importance. Even in the early days, few private bills were passed. Only 14 such bills were enacted in the first 2 decades. The significance has declined even further. Not even one private member bill has been passed since 1970. Indeed, just 2.5 hours are allocated every alternate week for this activity. In the 15th Lok Sabha, a total of 372 private members' bill were introduced. Of these, only 11 were discussed in Parliament and none was passed. The Constitution states that a financial bill may not be introduced or considered by Parliament unless the President, acting on the advice of the Council of Ministers, has recommended that it may be introduced or considered. This is what I told you before only. Therefore, the government has a veto on introduction of any financial bill by a private member. When now we will be learning about a financial oversight. Any expenditure of the central government needs Parliament's approval. All taxes may be imposed only through law made by the Parliament, and only the Lok Sabha needs to approve these items. And the Rajya Sabha has only a recommendatory role. Thus, one of the important roles of the Parliament is to allocate resources through the budgetary exercise. Every year, the central government presents its budget to Parliament. The budget includes detailed demand for grants of each department and ministry. These are usually referred to as DRSCs. Parliament discusses the general thrust of the budget. After the DRSCs submit their report, the Lok Sabha discusses the demand of a few ministries in detail. The demands of other ministries are clubbed together and voted upon. This process is called as guillotine. Okay, guillotine. Guilloytina. Tax changes in the budget are affected through amendments to various tax laws clubbed together as a finance bill. Ex post financial oversight of budgetary provisions is carried out by the Public Accounts Committee. Parliament may also choose to discuss any budget issue on the floor of the House. However, this process often does not play out in full. For starters, committee referral is not mandatory. For example, in 2011, demands for grants were not referred to the committees. The reason given that the senior MPs were busy campaigning for their parties in elections for 5 state assemblies. On other occasions, the committee report has been submitted just a few hours before the demand was discussed in the House. There are also occasions when Parliament does not discuss the demand for grants on the floor of the House, usually when proceedings are disrupted for some or the other cause. For example, both the 2013 demand for grants and a financial bill were passed without discussion. So all these things happen. So these are all real things. Parliament is too large and unwieldy to examine all important issues in detail. Unwieldy to examine all important issues in detail. Therefore, it has formed several committees that look into specific issues and report back to Parliament. Parliament has 3 types of standing committees and can form ad hoc committees from time to time. Ad hoc committees are the temporary committees. Standing committees may be classified as financial standing committees, DRSs, and other standing committees. There are 3 financial standing committees: public amounts, estimates, and public undertakings. The Public Accounts Committee examines the account related to the expenditure of the Government of India, annual finance accounts of the government, and the other accounts laid before Parliament. In this task, the committee takes into account reports of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. The committee has to ascertain whether the money granted by Parliament has been spent by the government within the scope of the demand. The committee also examines cases involving losses and financial irregularities. Since 1967, this committee has always been chaired by a senior opposition MP. The Estimates Committee deliberates on ways to effect economies, improvement in organization efficiency, and administrative reforms consistent with the policy underlying financial estimates. It may also recommend alternative policies to improve efficiency and economy in administration, examine whether the money is well laid out, and suggest the form in which estimates may be presented to Parliament. The Committee on Public Undertaking examines the reports and accounts of public undertakings. The reports of the CAG, that is the Comptroller and Auditor General, on these examine whether prudent commercial practices and sound business principles have been applied in managing and understanding and exercises such functions vested in the Public Accounts Committee and Estimates Committee in relation to public undertakings as allotted by the Speaker. Since 1993, Parliament has also constituted DRSs, each of which oversees one or more ministries or department. Currently, there are 24 DRSs, each consisting of MPs from Lok Sabha and consisting of MPs in Rajya Sabha. So, the document which I am referring is old. So, please understand this might undergo many changes. These committees have three main functions. They examine bills, refer to them, they examine demand for grants, and they can also examine into various policy issues. The committee's recommendation on bills, while not binding on the government, function as inputs to MPs. They are considering the bill on the floor of the House. The government may accept some of the recommendations and bring in suitable amendments, but there is no obligation to justify why it is or is not accepting other recommendations. However, MPs may also ask the government its reasoning for rejecting the committee's recommendations. In turn, the government's decision on whether to accept the committee's recommendation may depend on various factors, such as whether it agrees with the recommendation or its assessment of its ability to pilot the bill through Parliament. When the government does not have a majority in the Rajya Sabha, it may tend to defer to the committee. For example, in 2011, the Standing Committee on Finance rejected the National Identification Authority of India Bill 2010, which the government chose not to pursue. A year earlier, the government chose to ignore the recommendations of the Standing Committee of Human Resource Development on the Educational Tribunals Bill 2010 and got it passed by Lok Sabha, but had to defer the second reading in the Rajya Sabha after the general discussion on the bill, as several MPs raised objections. The bill was never brought to Parliament for further consideration. So there are all these things in that particular domain, and it's too important to understand all these things. And yeah, so I understand these are becoming too much heavy, but it is often very important for us to understand all these things. Thank you.